So why don't we get started by making it official? I'm here this morning to announce I plan to run for re-election as Attorney General of the state of Washington. Now, some of you may recall, because I know you were here, we last got together like this at the Westin Hotel back in 2012. I think it was March of 2012. It was probably the same room when we had a kickoff breakfast right here at the Westin. And a lot's happened for me and Colleen since that breakfast. And of course, thanks to you, back in 2012, we later went on to win that election and defeated $3 million worth of Karl Rove attack ads, thanks to your help. You remember those ads, right? You remember those ads. They were pretty tough. Those were tough ads. And after I saw the first one on TV at home, the first thing I did was I called my mom, who's here today. I said, Mom, just turn off the TV for the next month. You don't want to see these things. So my mom's a retired public school teacher, first table captain to fill her table for this breakfast. Mom, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And after that, things only got better. My wife, Colleen, and I celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. Colleen's here this morning. Colleen, please stand and be recognized by everybody. But then I have to admit, there were a couple developments that were not so positive. I came home one day and opened the mail and found my invitation to become a member to AARP in the mail. That was sobering, turning 50, no doubt about it. And then at this breakfast, you might recall, I talked about my faithful 1993 Honda Civic, basically the only car I've ever had. I love that car. And I was driving home from work not too long ago, and a teenager ran a red light in downtown Seattle and wiped me out. And you know your car is old, by the way, when the person who totals the car is younger than the car. That's a sign. That's a sign, right, that maybe it's time to go for some new. Colleen never liked that car, as we talked about at the breakfast in 2012. When I called her up from the scene, I said, hey, I've had this accident. She said, well, how's the car? And I said, I think it's totaled. She paused and she said, are you sure? So the car is gone, but otherwise things are good. And things have started turning for the better. The Seahawks have won 5 of 6, and we're back here at the Westin to launch a re-election campaign. So what I thought I would do this morning is tell you about 3 people in my life who made a big impression on me and helped frame the work that I do as your Attorney General. And I'd like to start with really my first client. When I thought about it, I wasn't quite a lawyer yet, but I think fair to say she's my first client. Her name's Mrs. Sanchez. I'll call her Mrs. Sanchez. And when I was in law school, I received a grant after my first year in law school to do public interest work. And I decided to go to a town called Guadalupe, Arizona. It's a Yaqui Indian community. And I went to work there, and I spent half my time working at the Capital Representation Project and half my time working in Guadalupe with a Jesuit priest who I live with there. His name's David Myers. And David Myers is an attorney. And his whole legal practice is working on behalf of Yaqui Indians in this community that, particularly at that time, was facing some real challenges. And so I remember my first day there with David. I said to him my first day in the job, and he said, you're going to go down the street and you need to talk to Mrs. Sanchez. And someone in her family passed away, and she has a life insurance policy, but the life insurance company won't pay it. So you need to go down there and get it taken care of. And I'm a first-year law student, right? I said, look, David, you're coming with me, right? He said, no, you'll be fine. Just go down there and take care of it. And I said, well, I can't help her out. He said, look, just go down there, listen to what her situation is, and you'll figure it out. So I went down, I met with Mrs. Sanchez and listened to her problem. And over the course of the summer, I wrote some letters and made some phone calls and had a meeting, I think. And by the end of the summer, we were able to get the proceeds to her that she most certainly deserved. And that interaction made a big impression on me, right? That what Mrs. Sanchez really needed, she didn't need a fancy attorney, really, but she needed an advocate, right? She needed an advocate to get what she deserved. And as Attorney General, a big part of what we do is work directly on behalf of the people of the state as an advocate for the people. Our Consumer Protection Division, for example. And I think it was literally my first week on the job as Attorney General in January of 2013 when I realized we did not have sufficient resources to do that critical work. And I have an excellent consumer protection chief. Her name's Shannon Smith. And the first week on, I think it was literally the first week on the job, one of my very first days, she told me about a potential case against Standard & Poor's. You probably know Standard & Poor's. It's a Wall Street entity that at the time was claiming to provide independent ratings for securities that many folks rely on for their investments. And unfortunately, in our view, Standard & Poor's was misleading investors in order to increase their profits. So Shannon pointed out that this was exactly the kind of case that the state of Washington should be involved in. But there was a problem. Taking on a case like that, as you might imagine, takes intense resources if you're taking on a powerful interest that isn't playing by the rules. And Shannon quite reasonably pointed out that with a total of 8 attorneys in her division and 20,000 consumer complaints a year coming into her office from Washington State residents, she wasn't sure we had the resources for such an intense case. So I made a deal with Shannon. I said, look, you go ahead and file the lawsuit, and I'll make sure you've got the resources going forward to handle that case and others as well. So since then, I've doubled the number of attorneys doing consumer protection work in the Office of Attorney General and increased the professional staff in the division. What does that mean for the people of the state? We've doubled the number of investigations we've brought on consumer cases. We've doubled the number of litigation matters we've brought on behalf of the people of the state of Washington. And that's allowed us to be an advocate for people like Mrs. Sanchez, folks who need that advocate. For example, when Toshiba and Samsung and other manufacturers engaged in an elaborate price-fixing scheme that impacted thousands and thousands of Washington State residents, we held them accountable. They paid the state more than $60 million, money that will go back in the pockets of hardworking Washingtonians. And when the Grocery Manufacturers Association spent $12 million to defeat a Washington State initiative and deliberately failed to disclose the folks who actually wrote those checks, I took them on. It was the most amount of money ever concealed in a Washington State election ever, by several $1 million. Now, I've not settled that case. It's still going on. And there's a reason. I want the GMA to explain their conduct before a Washington State judge. So the GMA and every other special interest knows one thing for certain. I won't let special interests come into my state and violate our campaign finance laws. I won't put up with that. And as for the rest of the story on Standard & Poor's, they eventually wrote a check to the state of Washington for $21 million. The second person I'd like to tell you about is one of my brothers. So I've got 6 siblings, 5 brothers and 1 sister, my sister Annie, who's here today. And by the way, I should point out that the official title for being an attorney general I discovered is actually general, like General Smith, General Ferguson. But the only people I may call me General Ferguson are my 4 older brothers. That's it. That's it. But I digress. One of my older brothers, John, he works in the fishing industry. He lives in Washington State, works in the fishing industry. And every year, he leaves his home in Washington State and his family, and he goes up to Alaska for 4 to 5 months. He's been doing this, I think, since I was probably in 8th grade. He works 14 to 16 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. It's a hard job. He works hard to provide for his family. He and his wife, Lena, work hard. They've got 3 kids. And those kids are having opportunities that John and Lena didn't have. And he's got a tough job. It's a demanding job, both physically and mentally. And to be candid, it would piss me off. Excuse my language, Mom. It would piss me off if his employer did not provide a safe working environment for him or did not pay him the wages he most certainly earns. Well, that's the way I look at it for every working man and woman in the state. That's my responsibility to ensure that that happens for every working person in the state. So that's why, as you heard from Pete a few minutes ago, that's why I'm taking on the federal government to protect the workers at Hanford. That's why when an employer did not pay his employees the wages they had earned, I filed the first criminal wage theft case in the history of our office. And that's why I asked my Solicitor General, Noah Purcell, to file a brief with the state Supreme Court back when the city of SeaTac, as you might recall, adopted a $15 minimum wage. And like virtually all policies these days, they end up in the courts. So it was up before the state Supreme Court. The state was not a party to that lawsuit. But the AG, the Attorney General, as Jorge mentioned, can file an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, if we have a perspective to share. So we made an argument, Noah made an argument before the court in his brief that no other parties were making, which is unusual, right? Normally all the lawyers have thought up all the possible arguments before the court. But Noah had an argument that nobody else had thought of. That's unusual. The court upheld that $15 minimum wage by a 5-4 majority. And the majority opinion specifically relied on the arguments made by Noah in reaching that decision. And now thank you. And now the workers are making a living wage in SeaTac Airport. So the third person I'd like to tell you about is someone my mom met back when she was in 7th grade, I think. That's my late father, Murray Ferguson. And Mom and Dad went to Everett High School and then the University of Washington. At the University of Washington, my dad joined a fraternity. So this would have been the late 1940s or right around 1950. And I think it was during his first year there that my dad realized that the fraternity did not allow Jews to join the fraternity. And so he left. He quit the fraternity. He did not make a big deal about it at the time, according to my mom, then or later for that matter. But as you might imagine, our family has always really admired my dad for that decision, especially when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. That's not an easy time to take a stand like that. My dad believed in treating people fairly. There's no doubt about that. And I believe that I should use the powers of my office to ensure that all Washingtonians are treated fairly. So for example, when a Fortune 500 company was denying benefits to the spouse of one of their gay employees, the same benefits, by the way, they provided to the spouses of their employees who are in heterosexual marriages, I thought that wasn't fair. So I took action. And that Fortune 500 company didn't just change their policy here in Washington State, but they changed their policy nationwide to ensure they provide the same benefits to an employee who's in a same-sex marriage as in a heterosexual marriage. And I'll tell you something else that I don't think is fair. If a man walks into a flower shop to buy flowers for his upcoming wedding to a same-sex partner, it's not fair and it is not lawful for the owner of that business to refuse to sell him those flowers because he is gay. It's not right, and I want to be clear, I will not put up with it, and I will use the power of my office to take on that discrimination every single time. Now, the Office of Washington State Attorney General, we're the largest law firm in the state. We've got 560 attorneys, a similar size professional staff. We're a big operation. But it might surprise you to know that when I became Attorney General, not one of those attorneys did affirmative civil rights work on behalf of the people of the state, right? We didn't have that. We do all kinds of work, but we did not do civil rights work on behalf of the people of the state of Washington. And that did not seem right to me. And I was really proud earlier this year to create for the first time in our office a civil rights unit to take on affirmative civil rights work on behalf of the people of our state. So Mrs. Sanchez, my brother John, my dad, these three people have really influenced my work, but there are many more who have influenced it as well. And you've heard from a few of them already. Pete, thanks for all you do for the working men and women of this state. Give Pete a big round of applause for the work he's doing. Dan Satterberg, you are a role model for how to run independent, nonpartisan law firm. Thanks for the work that you do. You heard from Jorge, and Jorge is a graduate of Yale Law School, and I think we all know that with that background, he could be working in the corner office of any private law firm in this country, and yet he chooses to devote his considerable skills on working for people who really need an advocate. Jorge, thanks for being here today. Really appreciate your support. Chris Charbonneau will be on the stage right after me with a very important request for all of you. And she has been a longtime champion for women's rights. It's an honor to have her here with me today. And also, finally, Governor Chris Gregoire. What a role model you really are for me as Attorney General. Talk about an Attorney General who was unafraid to take on powerful interests that didn't play by the rules, right? I mean, you can, not just in Washington, you can search nationwide. And I remember I went to a conference not long after becoming Attorney General, and I was talking to a former AG who was Attorney General when Governor Gregoire was Attorney General. They were colleagues. And we were talking about Governor Gregoire, and he said, you know, when she had the idea of taking on the tobacco industry, He said, I told her, and most of our colleagues told her, you're crazy. You can't win. You'll be in the courts forever. Your successors will be dealing with this thing. You'll never win. And he said, we were all wrong, and she was right. She was willing to take him on. It's a huge credit to you, Governor Gregoire. Thank you for being here. And lastly, thanks to all of you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the work that all of you do in your way to make Washington State such a wonderful place to live and to raise a family. And with your help, I look forward to the campaign, I guess with the possible exception of whatever Karl Rove comes up with on his attack ads. But I look forward to the campaign and another 4 years as your Attorney General. Thank you all very much.